everybody. Good morning, everybody else. Are you here this morning? Oh, that prayer, there was a line that stood out to me. I've never heard this before, and it just rings true. Our comprehension of you is not, what did you say? Our comprehension of you, God, is not the condition for your apprehension of us? Is that what it was? Something like that? Wow, what a blessing. It's good to be here. I am so looking forward to our time together. We have the delightful task today of reimagining God. And in this first message, we're going to make an attempt to reimagine God through the eyes of a very extraordinary individual who had an exceptional intimacy with Jesus. And I'm going to divulge the identity of this individual soon enough. But in order to get there, the message this morning is best served by spending a little bit of time exploring a common phenomenon of human psychology. In fact, as soon as I begin to describe this phenomenon, you will immediately say, yep, that happens to me all the time. Especially as we age, it begins to happen to us more. It goes something like this. Just imagine you're sitting in your favorite place in your home. Do you have a special or a favorite chair, by the way? Every American should have a favorite chair. Okay, so you have a favorite chair. You're sitting there in your chair. Maybe you're reading a book. And as you're sitting there in your home, reading your book, imperceptibly to your conscious mind, you are surrounded by what we call sensory stimuli. In the most immediate sense, your hands are touching the book beneath your fingers. You're focusing on the words on the page, but the words on the page that are entering your mind are being embedded in your memory in direct connection with the feeling of the book on your fingers. As you read the book, not only are you feeling something with your fingers, but the window is slightly open and you hear birds singing. It's so beautiful. And somebody's baking cookies in the kitchen, because that's what kitchens are for. And that aroma is just coming and surrounding you, and you're taking it in, but you're reading your book. Everything that you're experiencing is happening within the context of all of this sensory stimuli. The sights in your peripheral vision, the aroma, the sounds, what you're touching. But then as you read your book, you decide you need to do something. You need to execute some different mission now. You're going to shift gears. So you lay your book aside, you get up and you begin to navigate through your house, out of the room where you've been sitting, maybe down a hallway, and you head down the hallway. Do you have hallways in New York? Not really. So just imagine a hallway. And as you move down the hallway in your imaginary house, you open another door and you enter into another room. And as soon as you enter into that room, you say something to yourself like, what did I come here for? What was I going to do? And you've forgotten what you were going. So what do you do at that point? I don't know what you do, but I try to freeze frame the moment and just back up and retrace my steps, go all the way back where it began, sit down, take the book in my hands, and what am I hoping for? I'm hoping for what the psychologists call a memory trigger. Now, I may not be familiar with that language, but intuitively I know that if I can get back to where I began, I may remember what I went into that other room for. And if the memory comes back, what do you do then? Well, you write it on a Post-it note, of course, and then you carefully carry the Post-it note with you. all the way down the hall into that room, and when you get there, you read the Post-it note and execute your mission. Hopefully, the mission wasn't that you had to use the restroom, because that would be a weird thing to go all the way there and forget, wouldn't it? But this is how we're wired as human beings. We are wired in such a way that everything that we experience happens within the context of sensory stimuli. All of our memories, good and bad, are embedded in us within the realm of our senses and what we encountered. I had a guy say to me one time, every time I smell fresh cut lumber, I'm taken back to a summer with my grandfather in the woods getting firewood in for the winter. I had a lady say to me one time, every time I feel sand between my toes, I remember when he proposed to me on a beach in Aruba. Well, I want to tell you an experience that I had that is preparatory to what we're going to explore today. When I was a little boy, maybe 8 years old, I was at my grandmother's house for the summer. Now, my grandma, you have to understand, she was the real deal. She's not like some of these modern young grandmas. She looked the part. She was a real grandma. She was pretty tall, at least to me as a little boy, a large-framed woman. She had long gray hair all the way down to her waist that she would twist up in what she called a bun, put it on the top of her head, and put 2 sticks through it to hold it there. My grandma was a real grandma. The hair was gray. She looked the part. My grandma had her teeth in a jar by the bed. And she was so cool that sometimes during the day, she would drop her teeth from her gums and let them clank around in her mouth like a horror movie in front of us children, and we would scream and laugh and run away from her, and she would just pull them back into place and continue on with whatever she was doing. She was a real grandma. My grandma didn't have a washing machine. She put the dirty clothing in the bathtub, filled it with water and detergent, and we children would take turns marching back and forth on the clothing. Then she would put the clothing on a line in the backyard. Isn't that just so weird? And the clothing would hang there on the line in the backyard. This is my grandma, incredible lady. She had a loaded shotgun by the front door with all these children running around the house. She said, "Don't touch the shotgun. That's there just in case any Democrats come around." That's what she said to me. This is my grandma. This is my grandmother. Incredible lady. This woman rigged up with a string and a stick and a box ways in the yard for us children to catch what she called critters. And she told us stories of how she used to eat them. And it was scary business, as she would describe in detail, eating really weird stuff that she would catch. My grandmother, on that line in the backyard, I remember walking out one time into the backyard to play, saw the line, and I looked up in the line and I saw my grandma's big grandma underwear hanging there right next to my little boy undies. And I looked up there and I said, "Whoa, don't mess with grandma. Grandma is big." My grandma made all her own dresses on a treadle sewing machine without electricity. All the same pattern out of what she called calico material. It was ugly, and she loved it. All her dresses, long dresses on her tall frame all the way to the floor. But the thing that was most incredible about my grandmother is that she would wake us children up, me and my 3 siblings and a bunch of cousins that were there for the summer. She would wake us up in the morning with an aroma. She would make what she called cakes on the griddle, pancakes. And we would wake up to that smell early in the morning. And us children, we'd run into the kitchen and we would place any order we wanted. I want a dolphin, I want a camel, I want a platypus, whatever. And she had multiple bowls with different size ladles, and she put food coloring in the different bowls to make different colored batter. That's before we knew that stuff causes cancer. And she would create whatever you wanted on that griddle. She would make the shape of that animal and serve it to each child. She was a beautiful human being. She was amazing. And we would just stand there in line in the kitchen waiting for these pancakes. On this particular morning, we were running around playing hide and seek, waiting for the pancakes to be ready. Me, my brothers, my sister, and a bunch of cousins. And I ended up in the kitchen with a quivering bottom lip, about to cry, because all the good hiding places, in fact, all the hiding places were taken. I went everywhere looking for a place to hide. Everybody was hiding, and my older cousin was counting up to 100, 95, 96. And I'm just standing there as my grandma stands at the stove making pancakes. She says, Ty, rather casually, as if this is an emergency, and she says, do you want the best hiding place on earth? I said, yes, Grandma, they're all taken. Where can I hide? She said, Ty, I will give you the best hiding place on earth, but I am telling you, I am commanding you, whatever you do when you get there, do not look up. And then my grandmother, standing there at the stove, she lifted her dress to reveal her bony white grandma knees, and she gave one motion with her spatula, and I just went to home base right there, right there. She dropped her dress around me and just stood there casually making pancakes. I could hear everybody was found but me. And now all the children are talking, where's Ty? Where is he? We've looked everywhere. Where is he? She just stands there casually flipping cakes on the griddle. And she says, maybe he's outside. And I hear the front door, the back door, open, slam shut. All the children are gone and there's silence. My grandma says, how are you? I'm good. She lifts her dress. I emerge and she says, told you, best hiding place on earth. And it was. And if you're wondering if I looked up, I did not. I was a very good little boy. And we were bonded in a beautiful way that summer. Every time, without exception, that I smell pancakes, I think of her. Doesn't matter even if it's really poor quality, lame Denny's pancakes. Whenever I smell pancakes, I think of my grandmother. Now, I said all of that to say this. Jesus had a very special gift bestowed upon him by an individual that carried him through the darkest hours of his experience as he took the plunge to save you and me. Look at the story with me carefully right now in Matthew chapter 26. Grab your Bible, grab your phone, take a look at Matthew 26. This is mind-blowing. This is not something you want to miss. Don't be in intellectual or emotional neutral right now. I don't know what it was like for you last night. I don't know how much sleep you got, but sit up a little straighter, breathe a little deeper, and oxygenate your frontal lobe. You need to get this. This is amazing what happens here. Matthew chapter 26, the storyteller, Matthew, on this occasion, says, now it came to pass, this is verse 1, when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he said to his disciples, verse 2, you know, he says, that after, how long, everybody? How long? 2 days, just after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Now, I want you just to take that language after 2 days, tuck that away in your pocket. We're coming back to it. Jesus is with his disciples, and they're on a journey. They're just walking along. They're going somewhere on foot. They're having a conversation. And Jesus tells them, in 2 days, I'm going to be crucified. You will notice in verse 3 that these guys say nothing. The story shifts, in fact. They have no response to what he has said. Over and over again, these disciples, they're dense. They don't get it. Not because of a lack of IQ, but because of a lack of emotional apprehension. They cannot process the idea of Jesus being crucified. And so they are in a constant state of denial. And they just evade what he tells them throughout the gospel narrative. Jesus is going to be crucified in 2 days, and they don't get it. What these guys want is a God they've imagined. They've imagined a God who is defined by military conquest. They've imagined a God, a Messiah, who will come and pounce upon the Romans and deliver them, and not only deliver them from their captors, from their enslavers, but exalt them to the pinnacle of power so they can dominate others. They have a coercion picture of God. They think that God, at his essential core, is all about power. But Jesus is painting a different picture of God. Jesus is painting, not only in his words, but in his actual life and his upcoming death, Jesus is painting what we might call a non-coercive picture of God. He's introducing into human consciousness a different kind of power, a different way of processing relationships, a different way, in fact, of being human in the image of a different picture of God. In 2 days, I'm going to be crucified. And every one of them is saying in their minds, no, you're not. And they just move on. At that point in verse 3, Matthew takes us to another part of the narrative that's unfolding. Verse 3, then the chief priests, the scribes and the elders of the people were assembled at the palace of the high priest who is called Caiaphas. Now, check this out. You're with Jesus and the disciples, and they are moving along in this story, and they're having a conversation. Then the storyteller says, wait a minute, there's another layer to this story. He's using a looping technique of storytelling that is common even to our time, where you see a part of the story with certain characters and personalities unfolding, and then the storyteller says, hey, wait a minute, come over here, and some additional characters are introduced that apparently are separate from the narrative, but it's all going to intersect at the end. All these characters are going to come together finally. So Matthew says, hey, come over here. While Jesus is with his disciples having this conversation, over here across town in another location, there is something going on. The religious leaders, they are gathered together at the high priest Caiaphas's home, check out verse 4, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and to what? To kill him. Wow. But they said, check out verse 5, hey, let's not kill him during the feast, during the religious festival that's about to unfold. Let's not kill him during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. Now, I want you to notice something in this text. It's not obvious on the surface, but it's definitely there, and it is this. These are religious men occupying the highest office of the religion that is here depicted, and they are plotting the murder of God in the name of God. The best place in the world to hide from God is in religion, in pews. The best place to hide from God is not in the club. It's not in a profession. It's not even in an addiction. The best place to hide from God, the most impenetrable place to hide from God, is in religion. And these guys are hiding from God in their religiosity. And Jesus is about to blow the lid off of the entire psycho-edifice that they have constructed in the name of God. Well, then the storyteller, this is remarkable, verse 6, and when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. Now, pause right there. Now the storyteller has told us, okay, we were with Jesus and the disciples, and then he said, hey, come over here, and there's another layer, there's another tier to this story, and we see the plot to take him by trickery and to kill him. And then Matthew says, okay, that's going on over here. Now come back with Jesus now, because he and his disciples have now arrived at the destination that they were heading for. Jesus is now in Bethany. Now, Bethany, if you have read the narratives of the Gospels at all, Bethany is a very familiar place for Jesus. It's a favorite place because he has some people there that he loves dearly on a friendship level. People that he finds refuge and sanctuary with. People named Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And he's tight with them. Jesus frequents their home because Martha is a great cook. And because Mary is very inquisitive and likes to talk theology and to probe the character of God. And Lazarus, he's just an all-around great guy that Jesus loves so dearly that he will go out of his way to resurrect him in the gospel story. But on this occasion, Jesus is not in Bethany to visit that home. He is at the house of Simon the leper. Now, who's Simon the leper? Simon's a religious leader. Simon's a Pharisee. Simon had leprosy. And in that culture, in that religious perspective, if you had leprosy, you had some secret sin going on. God was punishing you in an arbitrary way. God afflicted you with leprosy in order to expose you to everybody else, so everybody could look and say, we know something dastardly is going on with you behind the scenes. So this man is feeling the shame of the disease, and Jesus has healed him of leprosy earlier in the story. So Jesus arrives in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper because Simon the leper has been healed, and Simon has invited Jesus to his house for what here is called a feast. What's a feast? That's a party. Now, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you don't know what a party is, but they used to party back in biblical times. And they were there to have a party to honor Jesus. Simon said to himself, he healed me of leprosy. I think we need to have a party. And so he invited Jesus as a special guest to his house. Now, you know what a party is like, most likely. What's going on in a party? Are there people at a party? Yes or no? Yeah, there are people at a party. And at a party, at a feast, is there food being served? There had better be food being served if it's a good party. So there's food being served. And are the people chattering and talking at the party, or are they all silent? They're talking, they're visiting. Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Where have you been? What's going on? Hey, pass the pita bread. Give me some of that baba ganoush. Right? So all this chatter is going on. Imagine it. Picture it in your mind. There is the hum of human interaction. Hey, good to see you. Laughter. The place is alive. Jesus is seated at the table as the honored guest, and Simon is there as the MC. Can you feel it? Can you picture it? And then, verse 7, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly, fragrant oil. And she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. Now, if you have an imagination, tell me what just happened in that room. You've got the hum of the laughter in the conversation, and this woman enters the room. She makes her way to Jesus, and she begins to dump this fragrant, costly oil on his head. What just happened? Everybody went silent. Maybe a little whispering. What in the world is she doing here? Well, Bethany's not a big city. It's not New York. It's Bethany. Everybody knows everybody there. They all know her, the infamous her. And she apparently was not invited to the party. She's not the kind of person you invite to occasions like this, in fact. But somehow she has worked up the courage to make her way in to this party. And she has come to Jesus, and she begins to pour this oil on his head. Later on in the story, it says that not only did she pour it on his head, can you picture it? The oil is trickling down through his hair, through his beard, onto his clothing. Then later on the story says that she doused his body with it. And then Luke's gospel says not only did she put it on his head and his body, but she got down on her knees and she covered his feet with the oil and began to weep at his feet, combining the liquid of the oil with the secondary liquid of her tears, and to take up the excess with her hair. This woman has the attention of everybody in the room. In fact, as the story unfolds, we see that there is a lot of chatter that is very uncomfortable for her that unfolds. Simon, with Luke's gospel, begins to say in his own head without words, if Jesus were truly a prophet, because prophets know stuff, he would know what manner of woman this is that touches him. And the implication is he wouldn't allow her to touch him if he knew. Maybe he's not the Messiah. Maybe he's not a prophet, because apparently he doesn't know, because Simon has a picture of God. Simon has an image of God in his head, and the image of God that he has in his head is an image of God that says God rejects people like her. Certainly, if this guy were the real deal, he would not even let her touch him. Simon believes something. You believe something. I believe something. We all believe something. Every person sitting here and every person on the planet is holding within their hearts a picture of God. And every one of us holding that picture of God in our hearts, in our heads, we are acting out that picture in our relationships. However we imagine God relating to us, we tend to relate to others. If God is distant and condemnatory, then we tend, when people fail us, we tend to censor them for their violations. We tend to reject them. We tend to condemn them because, in fact, we only know condemnation as our state of existence. Because we're not free in ourselves, we can't let anybody else be free, because after all, misery loves company. And this woman, in performing this act, not only gets Simon going, but this woman gets the disciples going, and they begin to say to one another, hey, if this woman has spent all that money on this costly fragrant oil, wait a minute, that should have been sold and given to the poor. Certainly, Jesus would not allow this expenditure to be lavished upon him in such a wasteful manner. And Jesus interrupts their thoughts. And he says, you're going to have the poor with you always, but here I am, right now with you. And this woman has done what Jesus calls, this woman has done a good work for me. Jesus regards what she's doing as a good work. They regard it as excess and waste. It's an extravagant expression of reciprocal love, according to Jesus, but according to them, it's just wasteful and ridiculous, and why would he even allow it? But check this out. This woman is up to something deep and beautiful. Because as she pours the oil on his head, his body, his feet, Jesus in Matthew 26 comments and says, leave her alone. She has done this to anoint me for my burial. What? The disciples, way back in verses 1 and 2, you remember, we put it in our pocket. In 2 days, he's going to be crucified, and they're in denial. But here's one person in the story who actually believes he's going to be crucified, and she has made a plan to do what is customary in that culture to do. She has secured a fragrant oil. They're not embalming bodies in that culture. They are, in their custom, they are dousing the deceased, post-mortem, by the way, with fragrant spices and oils to mask the odor of decay in honor of the dead, so the dead can be observed and visited. But this woman, at the last minute, she does something that's never been done in that culture. She's planning to anoint him post-mortem, and she makes a decision at the last minute. Wait a minute, I'm going to do something else. And this is fascinating. In Desire of Ages, we have this comment about what's going on in her head. The fragrant gift which Mary had thought to lavish upon the dead body of the Savior, she poured upon his living form. Next. At the burial, its sweetness could only have pervaded the tomb, but now it gladdened his heart with the assurance of her faith and love. Next. Mary pouring out her love upon the Savior while he was conscious of her devotion was anointing him for the burial. And as he went down into the darkness of his great trial, he, check this out, carried with him the memory of that deed, an earnest, or like a down payment, of the love that would be his from his redeemed ones forever. This woman hatches a plan to put this oil upon Jesus, not merely as an expression of the normal cultural process of honoring the dead, but check this out. She says to herself at some point in the process, she says, he's going to die. He's going to die for me. And I'm going to attend him through the entire ordeal. Everyone else may forsake him, but I'm going to be with him. I'm going to pull the memory trigger in his mind over and over again, and I'm going to be whispering into his mind straight through Gethsemane and to Calvary. I'm going to be whispering into his consciousness, I love you because you first loved me. Next slide, please. What this woman is experiencing is astounding. Luke's gospel comments on what's going on in her head. I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven, so therefore she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows little love. Next slide. This is what we might call the power equation of the gospel. The entire weight of emphasis and focus is on his love, his sacrifice, his goodness. And with the focus, the entire weight of the focus on him, something remarkable has happened in her. The power equation of the gospel is that love begets love. Much love produces much love. Jesus has lavished love upon her that has captivated her heart, that has gotten hold of her at the deepest level imaginable. His forgiveness, unconditional, extravagant, has been poured upon her, and it has caused her to love him in return. 1 John 4:19 says it this way, we love him because he first loved us. His love is primary. His love is creative. Ours is created. Ours is responsive. We only ever love God because he first loved us. Not by trying to love, not by putting forth a good go at the task, not by ratcheting up our willpower. We only ever love God because He first loved us, and that love has worked its way into our comprehension, into our hearts, and now spontaneously the circle of beneficence is moving. He has loved us first. We love Him in return, not because it's in us to love, but because His love is powerful and so beautiful that it changes us at the deepest possible level. Jesus goes from this feast, carrying the fragrance of this woman's gift upon His person. He makes His way to Gethsemane, and heaving on the cold ground, agonizing under the weight of the sin and shame of the whole world, Jesus, with every breath He takes, is reminded of Mary's gift. He's reminded that somebody does get it, that somebody has been tracking, that somebody loves Him in response to His love. Jesus is taken away by the mob to Calvary. He is hung between heaven and earth. And again, with every breath He takes, the memory trigger is pulled. The aroma of that oil, mingled with her tears and His blood upon His body, with every inhalation, Jesus is reminded and comforted and encouraged by Mary's gift. He finally breathes his last breath with her on his mind. He's put in the tomb, and in 3 days he wakes up to life again. And what's the first thing you do when you've been dead for 3 days and you wake up to life again? You breathe. And immediately, she's there in that fragrant gift. But she's also there as the only one who not only believed He would be crucified, but her affection has driven her to be there when He exits the tomb. Mary's the only one there to meet Him. She throws her arms around Him, and Jesus says, "Don't hold me back. I haven't yet ascended to my Father. Go tell Peter and all the other disciples that I'm risen." And Jesus ascends to the throne room of the universe, people. And He fills that chamber with the fragrance of her gift. And all the angels bow down to worship Him. And He refuses their worship because He has one thing on His heart. He turns to the Father and He says, "Father, can those whom You have given me be with me here where I am? Can they come?" And the Father says, "Well done. It was beautiful. Yes, she can be here. Yes, they can be here." And Jesus now has the one thing that matters to Him. He has the assurance of your salvation and mine. And the angels bow to worship Him again, and this time He receives their worship. Because He did not count even heaven itself a place to be desired while we were lost. God's love for you and me is so powerful, so beautiful, so breathtaking, that if we see and believe it, it will absolutely, completely change us, not because it's in us to change, but because of the creative, living force of His love in us that came through the person of Jesus Christ. Thanks for your time this morning.